Today we will be discussing small group communication and presentations. Our objectives for today is to discuss what small group communication is, what are the advantages and disadvantages, the structure organization of small groups, leadership styles, and presentations. So what is small group communication? It is a small number of people with complementary skills who are committed to a common purpose, performance goals, and a common purpose for which they hold themselves mutually accountable. Small groups are typically defined as 3 to 15 individuals. So, what are the disadvantages of small groups? Any of us that have been a part of a small group from a work standpoint, school standpoint, class assignment, even a sports team kind of understands the disadvantages of working in a group. Many times, not all group members share equal weight. We often have members that don't feel responsible for taking part in the group. And then on the opposite end, we have group members that feel the need to take over. And so the equal weight isn't distributed. We have social loafing, the concept that people exert less on-task effort when working with a group versus alone. And I think all of us can relate to this. When you're working with a group, it's a lot easier to get off track than maybe if you were working independently. It may be easier for you to focus and get your tasks done when when you don't have others around you. One person may dominate the discussion. Many times we'll have dominant personalities within our group, and so a discussion ends up geared toward one person and it doesn't become hearing the voice of everyone. Sometimes there's pressure to conform. That means basically you may have an idea of what you think is right or wrong, but you realize that no one else in your group really agrees to that. So you end up just kind of giving in. You have the risky shift phenomenon. Individuals are less likely to make risky decisions alone, but will if the risk is shared with others. So sometimes if you individually have a decision that may be risky, you're like, well, everything's going to come down on me if this isn't the right decision. But when you have a group that's wanting to risk things, it's like, well, it kind of comes back on all of us. We all made this decision. Kind of like we talked about before, we have I'd rather do it myself attitude. And then finally, groupthink, which we'll talk more about in just a little bit. So what are the advantages of small groups? We have evidence of increased creativity. I don't know about you, but I definitely have my personal strengths. But I also have some very strong weaknesses. When I can talk things out with individuals that may have different strengths than me, then it becomes a more creative environment. More ideas can be kind of thrown out there because people with different abilities kind of can bring things forward. If you remember in the definition, the word complementary skills was mentioned. So it's very helpful in a group that if I have some strengths but definite weaknesses, but other members of my groups have complementary strengths, meaning pulling up my weaknesses, then you can get more end results. You have increased commitment to implementation. When the whole group is relying on things being successful, when everyone is relying on the end product being successful for their own awareness and their commitment to a project, then it tends to be implemented a little bit better. If you've ever worked somewhere where one person has decided that there's going to be a major system change, the commitment of other individuals to implement that change is less likely versus more people that have worked for it. There's clear relationship benefits. You're getting to work with other people, you're getting to learn with other people, and you get to kind of be around other people, which sometimes helps us in our work environment. The whole is greater than the sum of its parts. We know that individually we have our own weaknesses. And if we're doing something all by ourselves, then our weaknesses sometimes become more evident. But when you're working with a group, the group as a whole is much stronger than each individual person and their strengths and weaknesses. You're able to pool knowledge and skills. There's accountability for weak areas. People can challenge assumptions, and that's something not all of us are super comfortable with. But sometimes if we're set in our ways, we have very specific ideas and thoughts, and we don't challenge ourselves to make sure that we're still on the right track, it's good to have someone around us that will challenge those things. And it may not change our mind, but it may help build the reasons why we feel that way. And we learn to really research our side and learn how to support what we believe. We build communication skills. When you work with a group, there's a lot of different personalities, there's a lot of different people, and their communication styles are very different. So when you're working with them, you learn how to adapt and you learn how to kind of communicate well with different communication styles and personalities. It assists us with organization and time management. Many students I'm very well aware of, and this rolls over into many people's work life. If something is due on, let's say today is September 5th and something is due on December 5th, then a lot of us will maybe around December 1st or 2nd think, oh, I've really got to get on that. But if you're working with a group and there's multiple parts relying on you, then little deadlines are necessary. You can't procrastinate the whole thing. More than one person is relying on you to complete your task. We define understanding through discussion and explanation. We talked earlier in the year about communication, and the truth relies on us discussing our differing beliefs. I may see things different than you do. So in a group, you're able to really discuss things and really learn how to explain things, and you can come to a better truth and knowledge. Task groups. There's different types of groups. We have task groups. Those people are assigned to complete a specific task. We have relationship groups. These are developed for relational purposes. Sometimes when you go to university, you'll have the experience of a sorority or a fraternity type situation. Some of you may be already kind of a part of relationship groups, maybe through your church, maybe through volunteer work, just kind of an organization where you can just build relationships with other people. Then there are assigned groups. Group members are dictated to be together. This will happen to you a lot in class and work. It may not be the people you picked, but it's the group that someone felt like you would work the best with, and maybe pull each other's strengths and weaknesses together. And then there are emergent groups. These are the things we saw, all these years in the school cafeteria, growing up in junior high and high school. These are things that happen to you within your classes, that happen to you in your workplace, that groups just emerge. Nobody has to assign them. They're just a certain group of people that get along well with one another and they work well together. So how are small groups unique? Small groups have their own culture, and we all kind of know what a culture is. Small groups have their own personality. They have their own way of functioning. They have their own way of communication. Just like any other culture, a group of people that spend a great deal of time together, they develop a culture. So within this small group, they have norms, they have informal rules of group interaction. Everyone knows this is kind of how things are run. You have a structure, you have formal and informal behavior functions, so that everyone has a specific role or structure that kind of takes over. I've been in committees before at church and at work, and so many times after about the first meeting or so, you realize, oh, this person is really good at taking notes. So that just naturally, that person takes notes for every meeting. You have someone that ends up kind of speaking out maybe a little more than others, or transitioning the conversation back to be on task, and that person emerges as the leader. You have one person that kind of always is there to provide another perspective. And so when you work with people on a regular basis, you begin to really see that these behavior functions take place, and that within a small group, everyone has a role structure. I want you to think of times when you've been in a group or a team previously. Many of you, you're thinking back to sports teams. You're thinking of the personality of your team. You're thinking of informal things that everybody did every week without really planning, and those are your norms. You're thinking of your role structure. You're thinking of that person that even though the coach never told you to, it wasn't a formal decision. You had this person as your leader or your captain or your motivator. So you're thinking about all of those informal behavior functions that happen within your team. Beyond that, we have group cohesiveness. When a group works together really well, they have trust and supportiveness. But this can be a disadvantage. Earlier I mentioned groupthink. So groupthink is this psychological phenomenon where group members adhere to the desire of the group in order to keep the peace and not to rock the boat, despite having a belief that differs from the group. Included in your course, in your Canvas course, are some additional videos about groupthink. But groupthink can be a really interesting thing to study. This is one example of groupthink that's also available in your course.
The gentleman in the elevator now is a candid star. These folks who are entering, the man with a white shirt, the lady with a trench coat, and subsequently one other member of our staff, will face the rear. And you'll see how this man in the trench coat tries to maintain his individuality. But little by little, he looks at his watch, but he's really making an excuse for turning just a little bit more to the wall. Now we'll try it once again. Here's the candid subject. Here comes the candid camera staff, 3 of them at least. And this man has apparently been in groups before. Now, here's a fella with his hat on in the elevator. First he makes a full turn to the rear, and Charlie closes the door. A moment later, we'll open the door. Everybody's changed positions. Now we'll see if we can use group pressure for some good. Now, in a moment, on Charlie's signal, everybody turns forward. Notice they take off their hats. And now, do you think we could reverse the procedure? Watch.
Okay, so that's a funny example of groupthink that can happen, where people just kind of watch those others around them, and they're like, this doesn't even make sense, but I'm going to do it anyway. This is another example, and I'll let you watch this at home. This link is available in your Canvas course of the Asch experiment, which is very similar to the last one, but this is an actual scientific experiment that was conducted. There's another video that's available to you on Canvas, and it's about the Challenger explosion. So the Space Shuttle Challenger, which took place before, I'm guessing, all of you were born, was an example of groupthink. It was a space shuttle that was supposed to launch, and the dates kept getting postponed and delayed. And initially there was a specific part on the space shuttle that wasn't made to function at the temperature that it was outside at the time the space shuttle was supposed to be launched. So the company, Morton Thiokol, that made the part was being pressured by NASA. And one individual at Morton Thiokol was really determined that no, this part was not ready for the launch. It had not been tested, and there was no proof that it would function the way it was supposed to. It was called an O-ring, considering the temperature of the last launch that it was scheduled for. Now, what was special about the Challenger space shuttle was that a teacher was going to go up in space with the NASA crew, and so it was on TV. It was watched by school children all over the place. So Morton Thiokol and NASA had these repeated meetings about whether or not it would be ready to launch on the launch date. There was one individual that was pretty insistent that it was not going to be ready to launch, that the O-ring would not function at the weather that it was supposed to be that date. But this individual had a lot of pressure from people with his own company, Morton Thiokol, because they did not want to upset NASA. This was a contractor that they worked with, and this was a really big deal. So this individual, again, was kind of overwhelmed by pressure from the group to conform and say, okay, yeah, it probably will be fine. Let's go ahead and do it. And so what initially happened with the Challenger space shuttle is that the second that it took off into space, it exploded virtually almost immediately. And it did come down into realizing that it was the O-ring that malfunctioned, as the man at Morton Thiokol had predicted. So it's one of the biggest examples of groupthink, and there's a video that kind of simulates that available for you on Canvas. But it is something to be careful for when you are working in a group, to make sure that when you're pretty decisive about something being right or wrong or will or won't work, that you be very careful about succumbing to the ideas of the group and not being pressured. So, working with a group, what communication skills are necessary for successful small groups? Number one, you have to have interpersonal communication skills. And interpersonal communication skills are those skills that we use every day when we're dealing with the people around us. It's the whole idea that we listen to what they're saying carefully, that we're thoughtful in the way that we come back to the person. So effective listening and interpersonal skills go hand in hand, but it's very important that we use our ability of tact. That means being very diplomatic in how we phrase things and communicate things with others. We implement research to support our point of view. We don't just say it's this way because I think it's this way, I believe it's this way. We have to give evidence if we're going to want other people to believe what we're saying. We need to carefully observe nonverbal communication. I will tell you this, and we've mentioned this before, nonverbal communication is a huge part of communication. And as a communicator, if you're only listening to words and you're not attentive to nonverbals, then you're missing a huge part of the message. So sometimes, for example, in small group interactions where there may be some debate or discussion going on, it may not sound like things are escalating, but when you watch someone, when you watch their fidgeting, when you watch the way their voice is changing, you may realize that this is becoming a little bit more heated than it should be, and this is something that needs to be calmed down. It's important for supportive communication. When you're working with small group members, don't tell someone they're wrong. Don't tell someone their viewpoint doesn't matter. Always be supportive in listening to everyone in the group. So leadership, we all know what a leader is. We've all observed leadership through our lifetime and will continue to. Leadership is a process of using communication to influence the behaviors and attitudes of others to meet group goals. So you have sometimes designated leaders, someone that's been assigned a leadership position, and then other times you have emergent leaders. Those people that are just in their personality, and they aren't necessarily the formal leader, but they become an informal leader by the way that they kind of communicate with others within the group. There's different leadership styles. There's democratic leader. This person encourages member participation, advantages a lot of group member satisfaction and commitment when they feel like someone wants to hear them. Disadvantages, it can be time consuming. If you have a lot of group members with a lot of ideas, sometimes it takes a long time to kind of get to the bottom of things. So a democratic leader mediates conflict well, encourages participation of the group, and has socio-emotional orientation. They want to know the group members. They want to understand the group members. They want to be able to use strengths to the best of their abilities, and they want to be able to distract from weaknesses in group members. And they look at the group as individuals and as a whole. Laissez-faire leadership, you may have heard of this term in economics, which essentially means hands-off. A laissez-faire leader takes no initiative for structuring group discussions. If you've ever been a part of a group discussion and things were a little hairy and a little out of control, then maybe you had a laissez-faire leader, a hands-off one. Advantage, it utilizes the talents of the group, but it can often be misdirected. A laissez-faire may delegate a little too much where there's no true leader. Communication style, they facilitate group activity but not discussion. They don't have a lot of positive feedback, and they provide information at the direction of the group. So with this type of leadership style, the group really has to tell the leader, we need you to lead, and it's not something that the leader naturally does. Autocratic leadership style maintains strict control. Advantages, it's very efficient. It's quick. It takes time. Organization really well. It's good for really large groups. Disadvantage is it's not going to create a very positive group culture or cohesiveness, and it doesn't allow for a lot of collaboration. Communication style for the autocratic leader, the autocratic leader will control the discussion. They will have little involvement for group members in discussion. They do not provide a great deal of feedback and do not want feedback from group members, and they dominate the interaction. Leaders facilitate small group interactions to ensure that the group is focused. that housekeeping tasks are complete, you've taken care of the necessities, that it's an efficient and safe interaction, that the communication environment within the group is one in which everyone feels that they can share their viewpoint effectively. The group shares a common goal. They're all striving to complete one task. Each group member is fulfilling his or her role. So in presentations, in this class for the online course, we don't have small group presentations. For the face-to-face, we do. When there's a presentation that involves a small group, a lot more practice is necessary. Usually have 2 to 6 speakers. Effective presentations are consistent and seamless. Weak presentations are awkward and chaotic. So with small group presentations, it's very important that you practice ahead of time, that every speaker knows when they go, and that there's a very smooth transition. You don't have the awkwardness of kind of looking around to see who goes next. It's something that everyone's very familiar, and it runs very easy. The key to success is cooperation and collaboration. That when there's a small group presentation, you really work together. You don't want 3 parts that are very distinct and different from the other. You want something that runs smoothly from one section to the next. Planning is key. Dividing labor effectively is very key to small group and having equal speaking times. Many students in a small group are like, great, I'll do the introduction and that's it. But it's very important that we hear the voice of each group member equally throughout. You need to relay the presentation. It's not something that's choppy. You have very smooth transitions. Everyone uses visual aids effectively, and that you practice as a group a minimum of 3 times together. Okay, and that is all the notes for small group communication. Don't forget that there are additional videos on Canvas to discuss the Challenger groupthink and the ASH experiment.